The rain had been falling since late afternoon, steady and soft at first, like a shy visitor tapping at the windows. By evening, it had deepened into a rhythmic drumming, steady as a heartbeat, filling the little stone cottage with a sound both soothing and isolating. Outside, the world blurred, trees melted into shadowy shapes, their branches sagging under the weight of water. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and the faint trace of lavender from the fire-warmed blankets. Isabel sat curled in her chair, a book resting half open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over 20 minutes. She wasn't reading anymore. She was listening. Listening to the rain, yes, but also to the way it seemed to carry whispers. She had always loved storms. They gave her an excuse to stay indoors without guilt, to light the hearth and brew tea, to lose herself in worlds made of words. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness to the weather, as if the clouds were not simply spilling rain but pressing the sky downward. A low fog clung to the hills, and the forest beyond the cottage looked impossibly dark, its outlines shifting like something alive. Isabel caught herself glancing toward the window more often than usual, each time expecting to see. What, exactly? She couldn't say. The feeling was neither fear nor excitement, but a strange mixture of both. Like being on the brink of a story you haven't yet been told. The kettle whistled sharply, startling her into motion. She poured the steaming water over dried chamomile blossoms, watching the pale gold tendrils curl upward, scenting the air with something calming and floral. But even as she breathed it in, she couldn't shake the pull of the outside world. She moved to the window and pressed her fingertips to the cold glass. Beyond the rain-slicked panes, the path leading into the forest glistened faintly under the scattered light of the oil lamp. She imagined footsteps there, splashing softly in the puddles, an image so vivid that her chest tightened, though no one was in sight. When the knock came, it was almost too gentle to hear over the storm. A single tap, then another, then silence. Isabel froze, her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her lungs. In her years living here, visitors were rare, and unannounced visitors at night were unheard of. She set her cup down and approached the door slowly, feeling the old wooden boards shift slightly beneath her weight. Another knock, firmer this time. She hesitated, then drew back the latch and opened the door just a crack. A man stood there, though man seemed too simple a word for what she saw. His shoulders filled the doorway, his cloak dripping rain onto the threshold, and his eyes, deep, amber, and unblinking, held hers with a strange intensity. His features were striking, almost beautiful, but edged with something wild, untamed. Behind him, the forest swayed, and for an instant, Isabel thought she saw something else moving in the shadows beyond, something large and hulking, a shape that vanished the moment she blinked. Evelyn stared at the footprints, each one perfect and detailed, as if whoever, or whatever, had left them had been standing there only moments ago. They led from the door into the hallway, curving toward the old staircase. The prints were small, perhaps a child's, though she lived alone and hadn't seen another soul in months. The air had grown thick, the kind of heavy stillness that follows before a scream. She reached out to touch one of the prints, and her fingers came away dry. No moisture, no trace of mud, only the faint smell of something metallic, like rust or blood. Her mind scrambled for reason. Perhaps it was a prank. Perhaps she was dreaming. She tried to laugh, but the sound came out strained and hollow. The rain outside intensified, the rhythm turning almost erratic. It was no longer random. It was patterned, almost deliberate, like fingers drumming on glass. Evelyn forced herself to the kitchen, every step echoing louder than it should. She needed light, movement, noise, anything to drown out the creeping awareness that she was being watched. When she turned on the sink to fill the kettle, the water came out brown, thick with dirt. She recoiled, but something caught her eye in the reflection of the window above the basin. A face, pale, dripping, eyes too wide, mouth open as if in silent cry. She spun around, and there was nothing there. The room was empty, except for the echo of a slow, distant creak. Coming from upstairs, the staircase loomed in shadow, each step whispering beneath her feet. She climbed, hand trembling on the banister. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched long and dark, lined with doors she hadn't opened since she moved in. The creaking stopped, and the silence roared in her ears. One door, the guest room, was ajar. She pushed it open and found the room untouched, except for the window, which was now wide open, rainwater pooling on the floor. On the windowsill lay a small, wet handprint. That night, Evelyn dreamed of a child standing in the field, watching her from beneath the rain. When morning came, Evelyn tried to convince herself it was stress, just the storm playing tricks on her mind. But the footprints had vanished overnight, leaving the floor spotless, as if they'd never been there. She told herself she should leave the house, but the road was still flooded, the car half submerged in the ditch. She was trapped. The rain's constant rhythm had begun to warp her sense of time. It felt like days were blending together, each moment melting into the next. Then, around noon, she heard it. The voice that it began as a whisper beneath the rain, faint, rhythmic, like a child singing a nursery rhyme just out of tune. It seemed to come from inside the walls. Evelyn pressed her ear to the plaster, and the sound grew clearer. "Let me in," it said again and again, in a tone so calm it chilled her. She stumbled back, heart hammering, but the voice didn't stop. Instead, it moved, traveling along the wall, following her as she backed away. When she ran into the kitchen, it came from the ceiling above. When she hid in the living room, it echoed from the floorboards. Evelyn grabbed her phone to call for help, but there was no signal, only static. The voice continued, now lower, more deliberate. "You left me," it whispered. "You left me in the rain." She clapped her hands over her ears, but it only grew louder inside her head. The lights flickered again, casting everything into brief flashes of shadow. She saw movement near the window, something small darting past, leaving streaks of water behind. By evening, Evelyn had blocked the windows with blankets and towels, desperate to drown out the sound. But the voice was inside the house now, echoing faintly from every room. When she whispered to herself to stay calm, it whispered the same words back to her in perfect mimicry. It was mocking her, learning her speech, becoming more familiar with each passing hour. She stopped talking altogether. That night, Evelyn dreamed of standing by a shallow pond, watching as something pale rose slowly from the water, smiling with her own reflection's face. On the fourth morning, the rain showed no sign of stopping. The air had grown heavy, the walls swollen from damp. Evelyn wandered the house in a fog of sleeplessness, searching for answers she couldn't name. When she entered the attic, a place she'd avoided since moving in, she found a box of old belongings left by the previous owners. Most of it was junk, yellowed newspapers, broken furniture, and a few moldy books. But at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was a photograph that was a family portrait. A man, a woman, and a small boy standing in front of the same farmhouse, years younger, the paint fresh and the garden alive. The boy couldn't have been older than 6. His expression was blank, almost somber, but his eyes looked exactly like the ones Evelyn had seen in the reflection above her sink. She flipped the photograph over and found a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Don't let him in when it rains." A cold dread settled in her chest. She tried to rationalize it. It could be coincidence, her imagination linking things that weren't related, but she couldn't shake the sense that the photograph had been waiting for her. The moment she set it down, the house seemed to groan, as though reacting to her discovery. From somewhere below, a door slammed shut. The voice returned, softer this time, almost pleading. "I'm cold," it said. "You promised you'd come back." Evelyn fled the attic, clutching the photograph. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and the lights flickered violently, plunging the house into darkness. In the brief flashes of lightning outside, she saw the boy again, standing in the field, motionless, staring up at the house. She screamed, but the thunder drowned it out. That night, the knocking returned. 3 times. Louder. Closer. Evelyn sat in silence, staring at the front door. The knocking had stopped, but the sound seemed to linger in her bones. The photograph lay on the table beside her, its ink smudged from her trembling hands. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, hammering against the roof with furious rhythm. The sound was no longer soothing, it was suffocating. Each drop felt intentional, like a code she couldn't decipher. She tried to convince herself it was the storm, nothing more. But deep down, she knew something wanted to come in. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the porch through the curtains. For a single flash, she saw the outline of the boy. His head was tilted, his hands pressed against the glass, though he left no marks. Evelyn's breath caught as the thunder rolled. When the light faded, the boy was gone, but his shadow remained, a faint imprint upon the window pane. She stepped closer, her heart hammering in her chest, and whispered, "What do you want?" For a moment, only the rain answered, but then a voice, clear, soft, and close, spoke from behind her. "You left the door open." She spun around, every light flickering at once. The door, which she'd locked and bolted, now stood ajar. Cold wind swept through the house, carrying with it the smell of rain-soaked earth and something faintly rotten. Evelyn ran forward, slamming it shut and turning the lock again, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening. Nothing, only the endless rainfall. She exhaled slowly, forcing calm back into her lungs. Then, from upstairs, came the creak of footsteps. This time, she didn't hesitate. She grabbed the fireplace poker and crept up the stairs, each step groaning beneath her weight. The hallway was black, the air damp and icy. A faint drip echoed from the guest room. When she entered, the window was closed, but the puddle beneath it was fresh. And in the center of that puddle lay a small toy car, rusted, red paint peeling, its wheels spinning as if just touched. Evelyn picked it up and froze. The toy was warm. The warmth from the toy pulsed faintly, as though it carried a heartbeat. Evelyn held it close to the candlelight, and for a moment, she swore it vibrated in her palm. The smell of wet iron filled the room, and faint whispering rose around her, too quiet to make out words but distinct enough to twist her stomach with dread. She set the car down on the dresser and backed away, watching it as though it might move again. The candle flickered violently, its flame bending toward the toy, as if drawn to it. The whispers grew louder, clearer. "Find me," they said. "You know where." Evelyn shook her head. "No," she muttered, voice breaking. "I don't." But her mind betrayed her, pulling forward a memory she had long buried. Her own childhood, a night years ago when she had been trapped in the rain, crying for help outside a house that looked just like this one. She remembered a boy, silent and pale, watching from the upstairs window as she screamed. The image hit her like a blow. Had she been here before? She stumbled backward, gripping the doorframe for balance. The candle went out, plunging her into darkness. Then she heard it, tiny wheels rolling across the floor. The toy car moved, slow and steady, toward the door. Evelyn turned and ran, half tripping down the stairs. The sound followed her, rolling down the steps one by one. When she reached the bottom, the car stopped at her feet. She could see it clearly even in the dim light. There was something scratched into the metal. Letters. A name. Evelyn. The front door rattled again. Not a knock this time, but pounding, furious, insistent, as though something wanted to break in. The windows shook, and a child's voice screamed above the storm. "Let me in." Evelyn fell to her knees, covering her ears, crying out for it to stop. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. The rain, the wind, the pounding, all gone. And in that silence, she heard breathing right behind her. Evelyn turned, trembling, but there was no one there. Only the faint impression of damp footprints leading away, vanishing as she watched. She grabbed the photograph from the table and held it close, desperate for answers. The image of the boy stared back at her, eyes hollow, mouth a faint line of accusation. She could almost hear him whisper through the stillness. "You left me behind." The words weren't her imagination this time. They came from the picture itself. The sound was soft, wet, like the whisper of a riverbank in panic. Evelyn threw the photograph into the fireplace and struck a match. The edges curled and blackened as the flames took hold. For a moment, she felt relief watching it burn. But as the photo disintegrated, the room filled with the smell of smoke and rain. She looked out the window and froze. The field that had been empty moments before was now filled with children, dozens of them, standing silently in the downpour. Their faces were pale, featureless, their clothes clinging to thin frames. In the center stood the boy, holding something small in his hands. The toy car. Evelyn stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body wouldn't move. The fire behind her roared higher. casting shadows that stretched along the walls like reaching arms. The children outside began to move, slowly at first, then faster, their feet making no sound against the waterlogged ground. Their eyes glowed faintly white in the dark. The boy raised his head, and in the thunder's flicker, she saw her own reflection in his eyes, terrified, pleading. The windows began to rattle. Cracks formed in the glass, spreading like veins. Evelyn screamed and fled to the basement door, throwing it open and rushing down the steps. The air below was damp, thick with mold. She found an old oil lamp and lit it, its flames shivering weakly. The basement stretched deep, farther than she remembered, the far end swallowed in shadow. She backed away from the stairs, trying to calm her breathing. Then she saw it. A door she'd never noticed before, half buried in the far wall, something scratched from the other side. Evelyn approached the door slowly, the lamp trembling in her hand. It was smaller than a normal door, barely high enough for a child to pass through, and locked with a chain that looked decades old. The scratching came again, slow, deliberate, as though something inside knew she was there. She crouched, shining the light through a gap near the bottom. The space beyond was narrow, filled with earth and roots. And in that flickering light, she saw a face. Pale, still, eyes open. Watching her, she stumbled back, choking on a scream. The lamp slipped from her hand and shattered, plunging the basement into darkness. For a moment, she heard only her heartbeat, and then the soft sound of a chain falling loose. The door creaked open by itself. Cold air rushed out, bringing with it the smell of soil and decay. Something moved in the dark. A child's voice whispered, "You came back for me." Evelyn bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind her. She shoved furniture against it, breathing hard, eyes darting toward the windows. The children were gone from the field. Only the rain remained. She collapsed against the wall, shaking, whispering to herself that this wasn't real. But in the silence that followed, she heard soft footsteps upstairs, small, uneven, wet. They were inside again. She picked up the poker from where it had fallen earlier and crept toward the stairs. The house was colder now, the air heavy and damp. The hallway at the top glowed faintly blue from the lightning outside. Every door stood open, except one, the guest room. She stepped forward, heart hammering, until she stood before it. The handle was wet, slick beneath her fingers. She pushed it open. Inside, the boy stood by the window, holding the toy car. "You promised," he said. Evelyn couldn't speak. The boy's voice was calm, but his eyes, those eyes, were pools of sadness and accusation. "You left me," he said again, holding up the toy car. "You said you'd come back." She shook her head, backing away. "I don't know you," she whispered. The boy's expression didn't change, but the air around him seemed to darken. Rain began to pour harder, beating against the house with violent force. The sound filled the room, drowning her words. "You left me," he repeated, louder now. "You left me in the water." The windows shattered. Rain poured in like a wave, drenching the floor. Evelyn screamed and stumbled as water rose around her ankles, then her knees. She turned and ran for the stairs, but the water was faster, surging up from below. The house groaned, beams cracking as though the very foundation rebelled. The photographs on the walls melted away, faces vanishing in streaks of black and white. The boy's voice echoed through the flood. "You shouldn't have burned it." She reached the bottom of the stairs, chest heaving, and saw the front door swinging open. Beyond it, there was no field, no road, only endless water stretching into darkness. Lightning flashed, and for a moment, she saw reflections in the waves, dozens of children reaching out, their mouths open in silent cries. Evelyn clung to the banister, tears mixing with the rain, her body trembling with exhaustion. "What do you want from me?" she screamed into the storm. The answer came soft, almost tender. "Remember." And as she turned, gasping, she saw her own reflection standing beside the boy, smiling faintly, holding his hand. Evelyn awoke to the sound of rain still pattering against the window, though it had softened from the furious storm of the night before. The room was bathed in a pale, silvery light filtering through the curtains, and the quilts around her felt impossibly warm. For a moment, she lay still, clutching the memory of the dream, the corridor of doors, the cloaked figure, and the crystal key that still seemed to weigh in her palm. Her heart beat faster as she opened her hand to look. Of course, it was empty. Yet the sensation lingered, as if something unseen had been left behind. She rose slowly, stretching the stiffness from her limbs, and crossed to the window. The courtyard below glistened with dew and rainwater, lanterns now extinguished, the world quieter, calmer. The mountain beyond was wrapped in mist, and for the first time since her journey began, she felt less like a traveler lost in a storm and more like a guest who had stumbled upon exactly the place she was meant to be. Still, the dream tugged at her thoughts, refusing to dissolve into the ordinary haze of sleep. It had been too vivid, too structured, to be the invention of her weary mind. The soft knock broke her reverie. When she opened the door, the same woman with braided hair stood there, balancing a breakfast tray. Steam curled from a cup of tea and a small bowl of porridge drizzled with honey. "Good morning," the woman said, her tone gentle. "The storm has passed, though the rain will linger. Did you sleep well?" Evelyn hesitated before answering. "Yes, though I had the strangest dream." The woman's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "Many guests say the same." She left the tray on the bedside table and departed quietly, her footsteps fading like they had the night before. Evelyn sat by the fire with her tea, watching the flames dance. The dream pressed on her mind, not with fear, but with a quiet gravity. She thought of the crystal key and the figure's words. "It is not for locks, but for journeys." She wondered if this hotel of sleep was more than a refuge from rain and thunder, if it was also a place designed to guide those who found their way here. Each sip of tea seemed to calm her body but sharpen her thoughts, as though the hotel itself wanted her to remember. Later, she wandered the halls, curious to see more of the place in daylight. The corridors were hushed, carpeted in soft patterns of vines and storms, their sconces unlit now that daylight streamed through tall windows. She passed closed doors, each with a number carved in wood. Some seemed ordinary, but others she could swear bore faint etchings of stars, waves, or clouds. When she paused at her own door, room 6, she thought she felt something beneath her palm, a quiet vibration like the heartbeat of the hotel itself. She pulled her hand back quickly, unsure whether she was imagining things. But one thought was clear: last night's dream had not been just a dream. It was an invitation, and she had already accepted.